to the 50th edition of Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga of our Virat Hindustan Sangam channel. As you know, last 3 weeks or nearly 4 weeks, we have been, I would say 49 episodes of this program we had completed, and today is our 50th program. So it's very interesting for the support which we have been receiving from our viewers, and I got information from our technical team that this program is watched in over 110 countries, and the viewership is daily growing. We have with us today, besides our daily guest, Dr. Subramanian Swamy, we have Shri Rajeev Chandrasekhar ji, who's a BJP MP, third time MP in the Rajya Sabha, and he has been a technology entrepreneur. And he has been always active in Parliament on issues of governance, technology, and economics. And he has been always raising issues of corruption, 2G, etc. And he has been outspoken MP on issues of concern. He had recently been a member of the Finance Committee, Public Accounts Committee. As you all know, he recently moved a private member's bill on declaring Pakistan as a terrorist state, which Dr. Subramanian Swamy also participated on the private bill discussion. So with this, we welcome Rajeev ji for our program, Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga on our Virat Hindustan Sangam, which we daily have at 8 p.m. So with his opening remarks, I would ask Dr. Swamy to initiate this discussion between him and Rajeev Chandrasekhar ji. Welcome all our guests for this program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and welcome, Rajeev Chandrasekhar. We are delighted to have you here. We know how busy you are and how difficult to get you are. Of course, you and I share one thing. We are both members of Parliament and that too of Rajya Sabha. You are an important member of BJP. I am an ordinary member of BJP. That's the only difference. But your speech...
And we sit next to each other.
Yes, and we sit next to each other. The question is, by the way, my picture is very dark. I mean, it's the light is not on, but doesn't matter. So as long as you can hear me. The speech you gave on your while moving your private members bill in Rajya Sabha got international attention. And it was something which people in Parliament and in the country really were happy to hear it and was hoping that it would become a law as you had wanted it to be. But you very gracefully said, if the government is going to take this matter up, I don't need to push it, which is the correct thing to do. I did it for the ban on cow slaughter the same way. The question is that at that time, the situation was such that it appeared that United States, Russia, China, many countries of the world, they were very, very well disposed to India. And that it might, in fact, follow up the suggestion that you made and declare Pakistan as a terror state. But the recent developments, one particularly that the Americans have made a deal with Pakistan to bring on board Taliban, which is a terrorist organization, and controlled by the Haqqani group, which is the most violent terrorist group, is controlled by Pakistan. And then we seem to be having tensions with all our neighbors, including Nepal, which is now claiming our territory, which is something I would have never thought would ever happen. And the Chinese, there have been some skirmishes, and the Chinese internal press in China very uncomplimentary about India. So we seem to be having a totally different environment. And so I would like, first of all, if I may request you, first please make for the general public, which is going to be quite large, and it's over 110 countries, as Jagdish said. We make a case why Pakistan should be declared as a terrorist state. And two, that in these new circumstances, do you think that you feel despondent? Do you feel that this has to be put in cold storage? Or you think that we should continue with this effort? Over to you.
No, so thank you, Dr. Swamy, and thank you all for having me this evening. In my tweet today, I've had the privilege of having many conversations with Dr. Swamy in Parliament and in the Central Hall when Parliament is adjourned. This is, I think, the first time that you invited me into a conversation like this. So I'm grateful and I'm thankful. No, Dr. Swamy, on the issue of security, my background. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm also a son of a Air Force veteran, and all my life I have grown up amongst people in uniform, and they have a certain ethos and value that I believe, I hope that I have imbibed, which is about nationalism, putting India first, self-interest, speaking up for it, etc., etc. And so those are sort of ingrained in me. And when I first really started focusing on this issue of national security was after the 2008 26/11 attack. And I felt that the 26/11 attack, for all of its viciousness and its cruelty and the mayhem, it did one thing about India, a country that was claiming to be an economic superpower or wanting to be an economic superpower. It exposed to the world, in my opinion, that we were a very, very soft target. We were a country that, after being beaten up that viciously in 26/11, all we could say was strategic restraint. And if it was not for that was the doctrine practiced by the prime minister of that time. He believed that there was some merit in doing nothing, and he called it strategic restraint. And if it was not for one police inspector only who got that terrorist, we would have been sitting in the days after just wondering what came and hit us and what happened. So it seemed to me that we were weak, and we were weak out of choice, that we were choosing to be weak. And it is a lot of that went into the 2014 election, and when Prime Minister Narendra Modi came in, it was, in my opinion, amongst many other things that he represented a desire for the Indian population to seek a more assertive India, an India that was capable of securing itself. So it is in that context that I introduced that bill. And I was, until that day, Dr. Swamy, you know that my conversations and my interventions in Parliament were always about technology or economy or governance. And this was the first time that I took publicly something like this into Parliament. And I was frankly amazed at the response. Notwithstanding the support of senior leaders like you, I was amazed at the response from across the cross section of Indians, young, old, youth, and for a person who's done many things in my life, including starting India's first cellular company, working on a chip in Silicon Valley. It seemed to me that time that the biggest thing I'd achieved was introducing this bill, because I would be accosted in airports. I would be accosted in meetings, and people would come up to me and say, "Congratulations, this is what we need to do," etc., etc. But long story short, I think, Dr. Swamy, that bill and the support for it was an affirmation that India deep down desires, and I don't mean India as politicians or India as government or India as bureaucrats, but India as Indians, deep down desire to be strong, desire to be decisive in dealing with problem countries like Pakistan and problem nations that support the problem countries like Pakistan. The reason, of course, that I withdrew it, as you know, is that I withdrew it because that is the norm for private members' bills. You are aware of that.
Yes.
But going to the latter part of your question about do I feel that things have improved or deteriorated since then? I actually believe something slightly different from you, Dr. Swamy. I'm not as experienced as you on geopolitical issues, but I feel this is the collective awareness about Pakistan as a rogue country, unaccountable for decades of action that are completely not the action of a civilized nation is coming to the fore, and it is peaking. The narrative about Pakistan anywhere in the world today, even if you go to China, the narrative about Pakistan is that this is a failed state or a failing state. Even the most optimistic apologists for Pakistan will call it a failing state or a state in trouble. So I think we are at a good place as a nation vis-a-vis creating awareness about Pakistan and its long record of terrorism with the world. Uh, Whether the US uses Pakistan to exit Afghanistan, or some China uses Pakistan to try and put pressure on India, it doesn't change the nature of Pakistan. It is a failed economy. It cannot survive without external capital flows. It has got begging bowl. It is a nation that everybody can see today. Even the Islamic countries don't want very much to do with Pakistan, excepting for maybe Turkey. So I think the what is it, the de-hyphenation of India and Pakistan started in 2014, and I think is effectively complete. Pakistan is where it is today, and it will be, if it continues this way, I think in the as a basket case in the history of the world. And India will chug along. Of course, yes, China and Pakistan will continue to try and slow down India's rise. But that is now, I think we are more capable today, more than ever, of charting our own course.
Well, yeah, well put. But let me take this a little further from what you have just said.
Right.
You very correctly identified 9/11. 26/11.
Right.
As a turning point in our Indian people's thinking, as well as the world's perception on these matters.
Right.
But two developments take place which make you wonder whether the people's aspiration can be reflected in the present power structure that we have today. The first one is the accusation of Hindu terror. And that is so ridiculous that even though on the basis of the earlier UPA presenting documents to the United States, and the United States then using that and cross-checking with CIA data, and then going to the UN and declaring Lashkar-e-Toiba as a terrorist organization.
Right.
And then the same UPA then turns around and says, no, it's a Hindu terror which was responsible for the Samjhauta Express terrorist attack.
Correct.
And people, army officials who are doing extraordinary sensitive work, like we saw, and a religious lady, they both were dragged in, tortured, made to confess, and of course they didn't confess. But all these things happened with the power structure and the officials collaborating in that. Mr. GVS Money RVS Money, has written a book on Hindu terror, and it talks about complicity of politicians. At that time, the Home Minister was Mr. Chidambaram. So all this, whether we are not in a position today to think of terrorists from outside, we got to be careful of what is happening inside. This is point number one. Point number two is that the Coast Guard had detected this boat coming. The people getting on the boat in Karachi, they had information. They passed it on to our central command, and instead of intercepting the boat, as subsequently Parikar did and blew up the boat, the Coast Guard was asked to just make themselves scarce. And the boat came, and these people, 11 people, got off with heavy equipment carrying, went through, that slum next to the Taj Hotel very well, and they went through that without attracting any attention. And then boarded taxis, which in those days of festivals, it was very hard to get, but those taxis were waiting for them. And then they go into the town all of them dressed as Hindus. This is what RVS Mani has written in his book.
Right.
And it was lucky, as you had pointed out just now in your talk, that one policeman managed to get alive that Kasab.
Exactly.
And when they caught him, he was having a tika and he was having, chains with God's pictures, sculpted in. All this, he would have passed off as Hindu. And there were books already printed that the 2611 was a Hindu terror attack organized by the RSS. Unfortunately, because of Kasab and he saying, I'm a Pakistani, and subsequently it was proved by the people in the village there too that he's one of us, that this whole thing fell through. So what does it mean? It means that in order to fight the terrorists, there's a lot of internal betrayers who can always defeat you when you're fighting terrorism. This is question number one. Question number two is, the Pakistanis may be declared as a failed state, but they are, as Lenin used to call, useful idiots. They are now teamed up with the Taliban, and the Pakistani political leadership is zero. It's just a puppet, and that's the military. And the military actually trains Haqqani and Haqqani group and so on. So we are today have to, develop our capability to the point that where we can separate Pakistan from getting any support from any country. But we find in the last 2 years that the United States has got closer to Pakistan after being very tough for a period. The Chinese are totally with them, and the Taliban has broken its promise to the Americans. They're killing civilians in Afghanistan, and will probably take over very soon. It'll be like Vietnam when Americans suddenly left South Vietnam and then North Vietnam overran. But then that time we had a leader who was knowledgeable and educated and had a long history of being a fighter, namely Ho Chi Minh. There is no such thing here. So I would say that what we have to think today is what initiatives we can take to come out of the situation where we appear to be more or less isolated.
So, Dr. Swamy, let me answer each of those, or let me respond to each of those 2 points. I think there is no doubt, Dr. Swamy, I think it is quite clear now to almost every Indian that the period of 2007 to 2014, where the UPA under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh were the government of India, was one of the, let us call it, one of the most dysfunctional, dishonest governments.
Right.
And I'm not talking about corruption of 2G and Colgate.
Yes.
Those are only small issues.
Yes.
I think they were dishonest to the majority of Indians. They were dishonest in terms of their obligation to keep India safe. And they were dishonest to the point that they were misusing both the media and the agencies to try and keep the Hindus divided and create this false narrative that the biggest threat to India is this Hindu majoritarianism. That was the
Yes.
narrative that they were fully invested in. That is the majority they went out to create. And if they had to misuse the police against the sitting chief minister of Gujarat, or the CBI against the sitting chief minister of Gujarat, they did that. If they had to frame a Sadhvi and a colonel in the army to create the narrative, they did that. If they had to have a leader of their party go out and launch a book after 2611 saying that this is an RSS conspiracy, they did that.
Yes.
They did everything to basically build a narrative that the enemy was not an enemy outside, the enemy was an enemy within. You know it, I know it. And in 2014, about 1 billion Indians came out, or 700 million people came out, of which 400 million came out and voted against them, saying that they also knew it. So I think, to your point, India will always have elements like this that are vulnerable to being compromised. and that they will work against the national interest, I think this is a given. But it is for those who have the national interest in mind to work together, to come together, and to remain consolidated. Because if we are consolidated, regardless of whether Digvijay Singh, P. Chidambaram, Manmohan Singh, Rahul Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi, all of them came together and did their tom-tomming, nothing can happen. But when we are divided, then these people play footsie in this, they fish in troubled waters, and they are able to plant narratives. So that is as far as that is concerned. I don't believe today India has enough of a center-right media. In 2012, they had absolutely no media. Media was almost center-left or left.
Yes.
So now I think the playing field, in my opinion, between the good guys and the bad guys have become more or less even. It was lopsided in favor of the bad guys earlier, and now I think the good guys are up there, led by leaders like our Prime Minister, leaders like you, and we are all out there saying, look, we will never let this happen to our country again.
Yes.
That's my answer to the point one. Second thing about Pakistan Army, and Dr. Swamy, I think it is necessary, for us to understand. The Pakistan Army are these crony capitalists of some of these Southeast Asian countries. They thrive off the poor Pakistani.
Yeah.
This is a country that is bankrupt, but at this time of a coronavirus, when everybody in the world is cutting back, the Pakistan Army is the only organization that gives itself a 20% raise. They borrow to feed their poor. They don't have hospitals to look after their dying, but the Pakistan Army will give itself a 20% raise. The Pakistan Army's, the whole reason for their existence is to create paranoia in the average Pakistani's mind about India, or some fictional enemy in Afghanistan. And that has been the argument they've used consistently to keep sucking the blood out of that country for decades. So I think I always say the Pakistan Army is the enemy of the civilized world. It is not the Pakistani. It is not the Chinese army or the Chinese people who are at odds with India. It is, in my opinion, elements within the Chinese Communist Party. So I think the China-Pakistan axis is an axis that will remain as long as India is on the rise. And the only answer, Dr. Swamy, I believe strongly, is we must factor in that not everybody in the world is going to be happy with our rise. It is even possible that sometimes the US administration may not be terribly happy for India to be strong and independent. So the only guarantee, in my opinion, the only guarantee to securing ourselves, keeping us safe, and ensuring our rise is for us to be strong.
Yes.
With or without the US, with or without the Western democracies.
Yes.
So we have seen, for example, the history, you know the history better than me, that Britain, which is the country that colonized India and pushed us into deprivation, has always been against India.
Yes.
And it has been against India because India wants to be strong. And Britain has never wanted India to be its equal. Similarly, it is quite conceivable that over the years, the US administration may turn around and say, no, India is getting too big for its boots. Because we have a sense of destiny about our own presence in the world. It is possible that the US says, no, we will be a little colder to you and less warm. But regardless of that, regardless of what China thinks about India, what Pakistan thinks about India, the US thinks or does not think, India must rise. And that can only happen if we make it rise.
Yeah. Well put. Everybody in India would like us to be a pole in the globe instead of being a junior partner of anybody.
Absolutely.
But let me ask you a question, not necessarily that I believe in the implications of my question.
Okay.
But in about first time in 2003, United States asked us to partner with them in the invasion of Iraq.
Right.
And I will say this because in the interest of history, some truth must be stated. Mr. Advani, as Deputy Prime Minister, had gone to Washington, and he had made a commitment that they would send, like the Polish people had done, and the Hungarian people have done, the French had done, 20,000 troops to assist the United States in its operations against Afghanistan, against Iraq. But no sooner he came back in Parliament, we passed a resolution calling the US attack on Iraq as an act of imperialism. It's on the record, so you can see it. It's unbelievable, but it's there. The second occasion happened when the United States wanted to get out of Afghanistan. And they approached our government, that is the BJP government, and said, people have great, ordinary people have great love for India. They're grateful for all the education that their people have had in going to universities in India. They like your Bombay film songs, and so on. So we have had enough, and we want to pull out. And let us have an alliance. And they said very specifically, leaving Pakistan completely out. And you put boots on the ground and say send 20,000 or 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. It is not that India has never gone abroad. Maharaja Ranjit Singh went and conquered Afghanistan. Zorawar Singh conquered Tibet.
Right.
So we have whenever our security interests were involved, we did cross borders. And at that time, our government took a considered decision. I'm not saying they didn't discuss it and the ramifications, but I'm going to ask you an opinion that we seem to be today increasingly isolated. If a country like Nepal can say that part of Pithoragarh is part of Nepal, which has never in the history they have said, what has gone wrong? Is a question we can ask for ourselves, because if we are strategic planners, we have to decide, are we in a position to go alone? Even the Chinese did not go alone. They, in fact, surrendered most of the time from 1972 till they became completely strong in the year 2000, when they began to feel that now they are equal to, and then they started showing their eyes, so to speak, or the dragon came out of the cage.
Correct.
But we have been all the time pontificating, it appears to me, and when the chips are down, we don't have friends. So how do you regard alliances? Do you think India can do this on its own? And of course, India has got potential, no question about it. But do you think that if we can't, can we partner with the United States? Or can we make up with China and see that China stays neutral in our dealings with Pakistan? It's a question of whether it is possible or impossible. I don't know. We haven't even tried. And therefore, we have today need to do some very deep strategic thinking. So what is your view on how we should proceed?
No, I think, Dr. Swamy, that's an extremely good question, and it's quite relevant in today's time. I am very unambiguous and clear in my view that India must have a deep strategic alliance with the US, and not just US, I call it a group of democracies, which is US, Japan, Australia, Israel, and South Korea. I mean, I believe these countries have to work together. And I'll explain to you why. One of the key things arising, and the coronavirus, in my opinion, is a great inflection point that will drive a lot of the reordering of these poles. One of the things that is clearly going to have to be re-architected is this global trade regime. The WTO, which was meant to effectively create opportunities for those who are underdeveloped countries, has effectively created only one winner, which is China. And everybody else today has a supply chain or supplies or deliveries from China. So in my opinion, without any China bashing, and I don't intend to China bash, I think it is time to relook at that model that is creating prosperity and growth and strength in only one direction and not necessarily spreading it around the world as it was supposed to be. Now, in the back of that, or the other side of this coronavirus, I think it is imperative for India to have these very strong bilateral strategic alliances: India, US, India, Australia, India, Japan, India, South Korea, India, Israel. Lot of the pieces are already in place. But having said this, Dr. Swamy, I do believe, and I was very much privy to the 2003 decision that Atalji and George Fernandez took. I was not in politics, but I was a big, very close to Atalji and George both.
Yes.
And I remember the proposition was very simple. It's the same proposition in 2003 and the same proposition today in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Our friendship and strategic alliance with the US does not mean we go into the quicksand in which they are stuck. That is not a definition of a strategic alliance. I mean, they will bail out of the quicksand and go, and they want the Indians there. That I don't believe is either sensible on our part or necessarily the definition of a strategic alliance. I think there are many other ways for India and US to demonstrate capabilities, joint capabilities, partnership, and each one having their back. There's no need for India to be only looking at Afghanistan as a test of US-India relationship. Because look, I think between you and me, Dr. Swamy, you know it better. Afghanistan is a lost cause for the US. They have spent so much of capital, so many lives, that the US under Donald Trump has a reason to exit Afghanistan. And there is no upside for any other country to step into the US's shoes currently in Afghanistan. So I think that is not, in my opinion, Dr. Swamy. Yeah, I don't think, Dr. Swamy, that is necessarily a way to gauge the Indo-US strategic alliance. Yes. I think, to answer your question bluntly, yes, we need strategic alliances. We must have our own network of friends. Our rise must be along with the rise of these powers, and those have to be these countries. And I'll add a last point.
Yes.
There is another element apart from trade and security, Dr. Swamy.
Yes.
Where these countries have to cooperate. It is the future of technology.
Yes.
Technology today, China has done a great job, as they have demonstrated with North Korea and with Pakistan, of proliferating technologies from the West.
Yes.
And using it in China.
Yes.
And that all the democracies of the world have effectively done all of the innovation.
Yes.
But the Apple phone is manufactured in China.
Yes.
The artificial intelligence future is going to be from China. So if we are not careful,
yes,
India and the Western democracies will find itself no longer the owners of innovation and technology, but rather it being owned by closed, non-transparent countries like China. And again, not China bashing. That is not an acceptable outcome for the future of the world. So I think trade, there is an opportunity for a strategic alliance, which must be with these bilateral relationships rather than the WTO.
Yes.
Yeah, on security, we should have it, but not necessarily gauged by or measured by Afghanistan. And we should have really strong cooperation and strategic discussions on the future of technology.
Right. Well, good point, but let me ask you, push you a little.
Yes.
You said we can't get into the quagmire or the quicksand that they have created and then sink there while these people, have a good time. I'm saying to you that today, if Afghanistan goes with Taliban and Pakistan, do you think that India itself will not become a quagmire? Do you think these people will sit quietly and let India do peaceful coexistence? Do you think we have a strategic problem there? And then if on top of that the Chinese are also with them, then isn't it we are completely isolated? Don't you think our neighbors will ditch us, and like Nepal has ditched us today? So therefore, I'm saying that there is, there's no such thing as winner take all, winner take all in the beginning. You have to make a choice. You want to have the United States on your side, then you have to assist the United States when they are in difficulty so that they can give us in difficulty. In the case of Afghanistan, the United States said, we'll open our warehouses, you pick what you want. You want planes, take it. You want tanks, take it. But please come and send your troops to Afghanistan and replace our troops. And we didn't think that was a good bargain. I don't know whether you think it's a bad bargain. In that case, what are we going to do? Is this world going to be a triumvirate or a triangle? Or is this going to be 2 versus 1? And the question is who is the one and who's going to be the 2? So that's the final question I'm asking you. Before I ask my colleagues also, because they are also keen to ask you questions. What is the strategic choice? And don't you think we should be debating this instead of pussyfooting and just making general statements which these think tanks are doing? Concretely, India must befriend the United States. If the United States says, please send troops, we should send troops, but we should get a price for it. You can't give something for nothing. That kind of nitty-gritty should be placed a strategic doctrine, not just every place you go. Even with Nigeria, we got strategic alliance, you see. When Manmohan Singh had a meeting in Nigeria, he said, India and Nigeria have strategic alliance. I mean, this is ridiculous. The strategic word should be used very exclusively, and there should be all the dimensions should be there. What is your reaction?
No, so I agree, Dr. Swamy, that the word strategic must have meaning. Strategic must mean something to India in terms of its obligations, and it must mean something to India in terms of its benefits. Only then is it strategic. It can't be strategic because somebody holds hands and hugs each other. That's not the definition of strategic. So I think so. Therefore, I'm going back to what I said. I believe strategically, India, if you use any of these 3 measures of trade and economy, security, and technology, India must align with and have alliances with these 5 countries that I mentioned. Now, having said that, I think the issue of Afghanistan, or indeed the issue of our presence in this South Asia region, is a good issue to debate. It's a good issue on what is our view towards ensuring that Afghanistan doesn't collapse back into the Taliban-esque model of the past and represent then a danger to the whole region and indeed to the world. And my view on this is slightly different from yours, Dr. Swamy. I have a view that there will always be efforts to destabilize countries and people around us. It was the case with Bangladesh a decade ago. And you see Bangladesh today, democracy is flourishing, its economy is flourishing. India's answer to the region must be that we are a beacon of democracy. The first value proposition that India puts forth is not feet on the ground. It is really that we will work with the people of that country or people of that region, leaders of that region, to ensure that the people of that country can elect free and fairly who their popular elected leader should be. So the biggest proposition that India delivers to Afghanistan is not to, in my opinion, fly in troops there and to create take an already complex situation and bring in a 3rd variable into it. I think there is a roadmap for Afghanistan as I see it. The US will exit with some base presence there. The democratically elected governments of Afghanistan will come to an alliance with Taliban. Hopefully, that Taliban will enter the democratic process. Hopefully, I'm not a soothsayer. And that democracy and people who want to capture power in Afghanistan, they will do it through the voting booth. In my opinion, that is, and in the end, if that turns out to be another Oli-like man in Afghanistan, it is the choice that the people of Afghanistan have made, and we will have to just use our soft power, our advocacy, to persuade the people of Afghanistan that India is their friend, holds no brief against them. Going back to Nepal, we know, Dr. Swamy, the communist influence in Nepal post the king and the killing of the king has been significant. It is a poor country. It is fertile ground for Marxism, communism, and it has remained like that. And there has unfortunately been no alternate political force or a political narrative to that communist narrative. So I think Premier Oli, I don't see this as a Nepal versus India thing at all. I see this as Communist Party of Nepal, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Communist Party of China, taking pot shots at India out of pressure from China. I don't see this as anything deep. Nepal, you know it, Nepal was the only Hindu state and continues to be the only Hindu majority country in the world, apart from India. And so I don't think that the core DNA and the core values of the Nepalese people are to be enemies of India or to have a agenda against India. It is for us to now tap into that. It is for us to work with the people of Nepal to say, look, what Premier Oli is saying is not necessarily right. And maybe in future we'll have a better premier who's less of a communist and more of a Nepali.
Well, one suggestion before I pass it on to Jagdish and my other two colleagues here. Don't you think you should be assembling such thinkers and develop some strategic perceptions in concrete terms? Step 1, step 2, step 3. If not step 2, then how do you go to step 3, bypassing step 2? There is no strategic thinking. Everybody wants to be on the right side of the government or totally against the government. There's no middle ground of trying to create.
Dr. Swamy, I have a slightly simplistic view towards giving advice in Delhi. I don't. I prefer not to give any advice or solicit an opinion unless people ask for it, because I think Delhi, Delhi being Delhi, is full of people who have opinions, and some of those opinions have agendas and motivations behind it. And I don't want to get into a competition like that. I think when my leaders ask me for my views, I give it to them as honest and unvarnished as I can. But I definitely don't want to get into the business of giving advice or starting to give my doctrine. I'm quite happy the way it is. When people like you, senior leaders like you, ask me for my views, I'm happy to give it. Hopefully through you, it reaches places that it matters.
Let me make it clear, you are also considered a senior leader, so don't.
No. I mean popular leader. Then maybe I should call you popular leader.
I still think you should think about it, because you are a thinker, you have resources, you have connections, you have a network. You should create, you don't need many people, say 15, 20, who meet once a month or maybe once in 2 months.
I will definitely give it a think.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. And over to you, Jagdish and company.
Arvind?
Yeah. I fully endorse Mr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar's view that bilaterally we should have friendship with Korea, Japan, Israel, United States, and others. But come to the neighbors first. When we look at our neighborhood, Pakistan as a challenge, and calling Pakistan a rogue state is easy. I mean, Pakistan also calls it. I know Hina Rabbani Khan, when she was a foreign minister, she also campaigned that India is a rogue state. Of course, nobody listened to Pakistan. That's a different thing. Why can't we use our influence in SAARC to isolate Pakistan to begin with? And once we isolate Pakistan in the SAARC, then we can go outside and tap so-called the friends of Pakistan, namely China and US. And once we have the full backing of the SAARC, perhaps maybe India will be stronger, and China and the US will also listen to India. That is my sense.
No, I have a slightly different view. I don't think Pakistan needs to be isolated because Pakistan is isolated. I mean, it is. I mean, in my opinion, it is. We should not be a country that is publicly overly obsessed with the country that is going down the tubes. I mean, like they say in Hindi, "Hamara kya jata hai?" Why should we have larger goals? We are a nation which is poised to become something big. We are planning to. Our ambitions are not about isolating Pakistan. Our ambitions are far, far beyond that. And I genuinely believe. I don't mean this politically or to make a smart comment. I genuinely believe, as a nation, we should never think that or never let on to the world that we are obsessed with Pakistan. It is like a poodle that, you walk into somebody's house and there's a poodle that keeps snapping at your feet as you enter the house. That's what Pakistan is. And unfortunately, that poodle does represent terrorism, and we lose a lot of Indians day in and day out. But it is clear that after Prime Minister Modi, the Pakistanis know that for every terrorist attack, there is a potential of a cost that is imposed on them, which was never the case before. So I disagree कि हमें SAARC में जाना है, we should go, to every forum and only talk about Pakistan. If we go to SAARC, we should talk about exactly what the Prime Minister is talking about, trade between us, economic opportunities. Look at Bangladesh today, a country that was till 10 years ago, a country that was only known for its floods every monsoon season and abject poverty, is today going at per capita income just less than India. In 10 years, it has transformed itself with education, women employment. So we as a nation should be what we are, which is a beacon of democracy, beacon of economic prosperity. And Pakistan ko we will deal. We will deal with Pakistan the way we should deal with Pakistan. We don't need to go running around telling people, hame mara hai, they've hit us, come on, please help us. I think that is a significant change, Mr. Narendra Modi. Pakistan is nobody's problem but ours. And we'll fix it. We'll deal with it.
Jagdish?
I only want to make one observation which Dr. Swamy suggested.
Yes.
People like Rajeev Chandrasekhar, Dr. Swamy, and other like-minded people rising above party line should have a organization like a think tank which thinks in large term foreign policy or defense policy, like it is in Israel, like it is in China, or it is in US. Because I feel there are some think tank, but they are more like, chit-chatting crowd. But it should be more serious, which beyond government, beyond elections, should be highlighting issues on a long-term basis. So it's my observation. I don't know how both of you all will like to respond to it.
So Jagdish, if I could respond first, I am not a big believer in think tanks because, first of all, in my opinion, think tanks in Delhi are a bit discredited because there are, I think there are non-thinkers who start hogging think tanks and then they pretend to be thinkers. So I am not a big fan of that. But I will agree with one point you are making, and I think it's a point that Dr. Swamy made. I think there has to be more debate in Parliament about some of these strategic issues. And about 5-6 years ago, I had suggested to the then Prime Minister, not 5-6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, that there should be special sessions of Parliament in the year, maybe 1 or 2 special sessions of 4 days, 5 days each, where specific topics are discussed without any bills being passed, so that the nation can watch parliamentarians engage, for example, on a strategic doctrine, like Dr. Swamy said. 2 days of debate, everybody participates, everybody tosses in it. For example, on poverty, we have 75 years of democracy, 75 years of independence, and even today we have to see this horrible sight of the poor and vulnerable crisscrossing the country, suffering. There is something wrong. We keep saying there has been Garibi Hatao, and there have been lakhs and crores spent. Parliament should convene for 2-3 days on these kind of bipartisan issues. And I call them special sessions or whatever it is. More than a think tank, I think the people of the country must see our political leaders and public representatives talking fact, talking sense about the pressing issues that face the nation, which could be poverty, it could be industry, it could be national security, whatever. Kyunki ye partisanship mein, in partisanship, everything is getting diluted. There's no common minimum sort of a thing that happens. It's always the lowest common denominator that seems to come out of these discussions in Parliament. So I think Dr. Swamy and people like that should take the lead and maybe persuade the government of the day to do something like this.
I would say, then instead of calling it think tank, you can call it deep state. Ramesh? You want to say anything, Ramesh?
Yeah, I have 4 points, unfortunately. Today I have a lot more points.
Yeah, you've been stimulated by his clarity. You see, that's his strength. He speaks so clear
Yeah.
And after researching that, you will get many more questions. Yes.
Okay. So the first point, Rajiv, you mentioned something about democracy should be allowed to grow in Afghanistan. We should not interfere. Whenever you want something to grow, the soil should be fertile enough so that it grows. Okay. I don't think Afghanistan, with the Taliban in today, is that fertile for democracy to really survive. Okay. So we have to facilitate that.
Yeah,
So we could
absolutely.
do that.
No, I agree with you. I think, people said that about Maldives. People said that about Bangladesh. People say that about Nepal today. But I look, I think in today's world with the internet and with individual access to information at an unprecedented level, it is very difficult whether you're an Afghan or whether you're in Sudan or whether you're in Maldives to repress people or to brainwash people or isolate them from the facts. The only country that is successfully doing that today is China, because they have firewalled the internet. But every one of these other countries and individual citizens, we must have faith that they aspire to true democracy. Now, I'm not saying that that path is paved with gold and is all smooth and tarred and welcoming for the ordinary Afghan. It is not. But that is the role that India and the US and all of these countries must play.
Yes, Ramesh.
Yeah. The second point. The second point that I had was I think Dr. Swamy has mentioned this multiple times. I mean, Pakistan as a failed state cannot operate the way it is. It needs to be broken up into 4 or 5 pieces, whatever it needs to be.
Yes.
And then democracy will survive on very easily. It'll germinate faster than what it is today.
I agree with you.
What's your reaction to that?
No, I agree with you. And I have a counter theory for this. I have a belief that Pakistan today is only intact because the Pakistani army has managed to distract the Pakistani citizen and population for the last 6 decades with this so-called enemy India. So whenever there is a domestic crisis, now Imran Khan, if you notice him for the last 15 days, 20 days of this lockdown, has not uttered a word about the coronavirus, hasn't uttered a word about people dying. But every time there is a domestic crisis, they will trot out Kashmir, the oppression in Kashmir. They will the Indians doing this, the Indians doing that. India for them, for Pakistani army and the Pakistani politician, India is a blessing. If India wasn't there, they would not be existent. Their entire reason to exist would disappear. So, in my opinion, the moment the people of Pakistan realize they are being denied prosperity, they are being denied a good life because of this huge leeching organism called the Pakistani army, and that presence dilutes, that control of the Pakistani army dilutes, automatically I believe the Pakistan will find its natural state of affairs.
Okay, now the third point. Sorry about this, Dr. Swamy. I have the third point.
No, go ahead.
See, the thing is, I don't really see the benefit of SARC. I know what you said. Modi went and talked about trade and all those things. But if you want to do that, just have a trade agreement. Why do you need SARC? With SARC as an entity is a failed concept. That's my personal view. And I think we need to get away with it.
I think the last 50, 70 years of the world, we've had many of these organizations. We had NATO, we had CENTO, we had Commonwealth, we had non-aligned movement, we had SARC, we had, many of these sort of the WTO, then you have G7, G20. Now, in my opinion, in this new post-coronavirus world, a lot of these things will start becoming meaningless, excepting maybe the G7 and the G20. And what will really drive things is basically bilateral or groups of countries coming together and coming to agreements that are bound on these, either all or some of these principles, or economics and trade, technology and security. These are the 3 things that countries today want relationships with other countries for. There is no the old days when the Commonwealth would rush into action or NATO would rush into action because of Warsaw Pact and there was some mutual defense treaties. In my opinion, those are increasingly becoming less relevant. So I agree with you. There is a school of thought that these regional blocks mean ASEAN, SARC, may mean less and less as we go forward. because there will be more direct bilateral relations and strategic alliances between nations.
Okay, another. So again, I come to. Do you think? I mean, I live in the US, so the US pretty much uses sanctions as the hammer to people, make countries submit to their power.
Yes.
Is India at that point to really push sanctions against Pakistan, a rogue state? And do you think that we're there? And what gets us there?
No, I don't think we need. Like I said, I don't think India should at all even remotely communicate or build a perception that we are so obsessed with Pakistan. My own take is, I'm an analytical person. If you, and I don't know how many of your math or physics fans, but if you just project out Pakistan's future, you take today's base as a base case and you project it out. There is no way there is an optimistic, positive scenario for Pakistan or Pakistanis at all. So if there is a terminal decline of this failed state, why do we want our fingerprints on it? Let it decline. In my opinion, what you said correctly, the inherent contradictions within Pakistan, the increasing desire for Pakistanis to be prosperous and out of the clutches of the Pakistan army will come forth organically. And we should just wait for it to happen. I don't think there is any need for us to necessarily get into this sanction thing. We are not a US. We neither have the capability to enforce those sanctions, because sanctions with the Pakistan means what? That we can only one way reduce flow from India to them. We can sanction some Pakistanis coming to work in India. We can sanction movement of trade between India and Pakistan. But Pakistan will easily bypass that by going to China. So there is no point. I always say, if you have a Brahmastra, the Brahmastra must kill. There is no point taking a Brahmastra and then having that Brahmastra fail. Sanction, in my opinion, is a Brahmastra. And if the Brahmastra is used, then the person against whom it is used must be crippled effectively. And I don't think sanctions is a way to deal with Pakistan at all.
And the last one is more of an observation. You talked about, debates in the parliament, were dedicated. And you want Dr. Swamy to lead it? Forget about it. It's not going to happen.
No.
I don't think the Congress would ever
I think Dr. Swamy has his group of fans and not so fans. That's normal for anybody who has strong views. I can assure you that it's not like I'm greatly loved by all sections of parliament either. But Dr. Swamy obviously has much more pronounced and sharper views on many issues. But my point is not that. I think there must be a movement, and it can only be by the most senior people in parliament who have seen this country for more years, seen parliament operate for more years and decades. And Dr. Swamy has been in parliament when the
1974
emergency was clamped. I mean, if there is a person qualified to talk about preserving the sanctity of parliament and integrity of parliment, he will be high in that list of people.
I think there is hunger for such a debate.
I'm not necessarily saying he's the only man, but I'm saying people like me can't do it. We are first of all in Rajya Sabha, and I can't claim to be a popular person leader. We operate on our ideas and thinking rather than mass appeal. And there are other leaders who have got much more mass appeal and mass charisma, and they must make the effort and across parties to say, look, I think the country has these important issues. We owe it to the people of India, today's generation and the future generation, to start talking about it, and if not coming up with solutions, at least creating awareness amongst people that these problems exist.
Concluding remarks from Dr. Swamy. Concluding remarks from you.
Only one remark. In this whole debate or discussion, there was not even a whisper that we could perhaps change the paradigm that we are facing today by having good relations with China and together deal with the world as the two countries as one.
But
is that
I'll give you
a dream that is not possible?
Dr. Swamy, I'll give you my view on China. I think it's like trying to make I'm not maybe using the exact example, but trying to make Palestine and Israel dance together at a at a ball. I mean, it's a great idea. It's a utopian idea. India and China have very many things that they are going to come to head on, including India's desire to be economic equal, if not equal, or economic pole in Asia. Now, this is not something that the Chinese are going to lay a red carpet and say Hindi Chini bye bye. The last time they said Hindi Chini bye bye, they were halfway into India. So, we don't. I don't subscribe that Hindi Chini will ever be bye bye. We can at best be mutually respectful, mutually wary of each other nations, which is perfectly fine. We don't have to necessarily think that that is a bad idea. But to expect that India and China will come together and agree, we will agree on some things. I mean, we don't even agree on the origin of the Wuhan virus. So, I mean, I don't think there's much more to talk about China at this stage.
By the way, we were also party to the research, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research.
I read it. I read that article recently. Yeah.
Before Arvind Chaturvedi is going to conclude this session, I have to share with our viewers some information regarding our viewership. As I mentioned at the start of the program, we are watched in about 110 countries across the globe. Our program, Words of Wisdom, Gyan Ganga. Our latest survey shows that for the 49 episodes which we have webcast till yesterday on our 4 channels, that is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter Periscope, the viewership has been more than 3 million viewers.
Wow.
That's viewers in 110 countries. So with this note, I thank people for their support. Over to Dr. Arvind Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Mr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar and Dr. Subramanian Swamy for a very thought-provoking discussion on a topic which is dear to many Indians, and that's why we have a surge in our viewership also. Today we have crossed a milestone. We have completed 50 episodes. On 2nd of April, when we started, we did not even know how long we will go because we thought it's a lockdown. And that time the lockdown was till about 17th of April. So we thought Dr. Swamy is available. So for 15 days, we'll utilize his time. And it has been 50 days continuously every day at 8 p.m. And as Jagdish has just said, we are not only viewed in India, our viewership is in US, UK, and many different countries. In fact, if we count, it is 110. But every day, the popularity of these Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga program is increasing day by day. And of course, the constant blessings of Dr. Subramanian Swamy and his time, which is available almost an hour per day. I have to thank Mr. Ramesh Swamy, without whose support this would not have been possible. In fact, entire technical help. And every day, every kind of technical improvement that we have, that is due to Mr. Ramesh Swamy. My big thank to Mr. Ramesh Swamy. I also join you, I appeal you to join to thank Mr. Jagdish Shetty, who has also conceptualized. In fact, 3 of us, when we discussed this, how to go about it, we did not know what kind of shape it will take and what kind of format it will take. But Jagdish Shetty has taken lot of efforts and he devoted a lot of time. So thanks Jagdish Shetty for this. Our technical team, no less contribution. Without our acknowledgement, this will not be complete. Ashish Shetty, Tejas Navalgund, Ishwar Iyer, Gadgi Ramesh, Yash Bharadwaj, Swaminathan, Nataraj. All these people have been working day in and day out for last 50 days. In fact, now we have an opportunity, since the number of viewership is also increasing, we may also extend it beyond the lockdown period. And ultimately, as I said, constant blessings of Dr. Swamy, without whose support and without whose blessing, it would not have been possible. All the guests who have joined, including Mr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar today, Yesterday we had Mr. Sarju Rai. Day before yesterday we have Ram Bahadur Rai. We had G.D. Bakshi. We had Monu Nalapat. All
Rajeev
those guests.
Malhotra.
RBS Mani, Rajeev Malhotra, who has appeared in 4 episodes out of 50, and all such guests who have appeared. A big thank to all of them, and with this promise that we'll continue to provide a thought-provoking atmosphere for a good discussion on topics which are critical to India. Tomorrow again, we'll meet at 8 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Thank you very much. Namaskar. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Do you have
Thank you.
closing words, or we can end?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure to be in a conversation with Dr. Swamy. Like I said, it's always insightful and interesting. Thank you so much for having me.
Good. It's a pleasure.
Just a minute, silence.